Forget everything you think you know about Sparta. Seriously, just wipe it clean. Because the Spartans you saw in 300, those chiseled, cape-wearing, one-liner dropping warriors, they were basically the ancient Greek equivalent of an action figure. Cool to look at, fun to quote, but about as historically accurate as a chocolate teapot. The real Spartans, they were so much weirder. We're talking about a society that literally trained children to steal, where grown men spent more time on their hair than a 1980s rock band, and where wedding night traditions were so bizarre that even other ancient Greeks thought they were strange. And these people were considered the greatest warriors in the Mediterranean. So today we're going deep into the real Sparta, the one the movie didn't show you, because honestly, Hollywood probably couldn't figure out how to make it look cool. But trust me, it's way more fascinating than fiction. Let's start with one of the wildest parts of Spartan society, something you will never see in a Gerard Butler movie. Spartans trained their kids to steal, not as a punishment, not as some underground rebellion. This was official state policy. It was part of the curriculum. When Spartan boys entered the Agoge, which was the brutal education and training program every male citizen had to go through. Starting at age 7, they were deliberately underfed. They were given one cloak for the entire year, no shoes, barely enough food to survive. And this wasn't neglect. This was the plan. The idea was that hunger would motivate them to steal food from nearby farms, from older citizens, from wherever they could get it. The catch? You could steal, but you could not get caught. If you pulled it off, congratulations. You just demonstrated cunning, stealth, and resourcefulness. All qualities Sparta valued in a soldier. But if you got caught, you were beaten. Not for stealing. You were beaten for being bad at it. There's a famous ancient story about a Spartan boy who stole a fox and hid it under his cloak. When an adult stopped to talk to him, the boy stood perfectly still, while the fox literally clawed and bit into his stomach. He died rather than reveal the theft, and instead of being horrified, the Spartans held him up as an example of ideal behavior. That's the world we're dealing with here, a world where getting mauled by a hidden fox was considered a flex. Now let's talk about something 300 completely ignored: Spartan hair. In the movie, the Spartans are basically bald or have these short, practical military cuts. Makes sense, right? You're a warrior, you keep it simple. Except real Spartans did the exact opposite. Spartan men grew their hair long, really long, and they were obsessed with grooming it. Before the Battle of Thermopylae, the actual historical event the movie is based on, Persian scouts reported back to King Xerxes that the Spartans were sitting outside their camp, combing and styling their hair. Xerxes reportedly laughed. He thought they were ridiculous. But his advisor, a former Spartan king named Demaratus, told him that this was a sign they were preparing to fight to the death, because Spartans groomed their hair before battle the way other warriors sharpened their swords. It was ritual, it was identity. Long, well-kept hair was a symbol of a free man and a warrior in Spartan culture. Cutting someone's hair was actually a punishment. The Spartans believed that long hair made a handsome man more handsome and an ugly man more terrifying. So picture the real Thermopylae, not a bunch of guys in leather underwear with buzz cuts. Picture 300 warriors with flowing, carefully braided hair, oiled and gleaming in the sun, calmly preparing to die. That's arguably way more intimidating, but I guess Hollywood thought audiences weren't ready for the Pantene commercial version of ancient warfare. Okay, let's get into Spartan relationships, because this is where things get truly unusual. In most of ancient Greece, women had very few rights. They were basically property. Sparta was different, and not in a way anyone expected. Spartan women had more freedom than almost any other women in the ancient world. They owned property, sometimes as much as 40% of all the land in Sparta. They exercised publicly, which scandalized other Greeks. They spoke their minds, and there are dozens of recorded quotes from Spartan women that are absolutely savage. One mother reportedly handed her son his shield before battle and said, quote, "Come back with this or on it," meaning either win or die trying. But the wedding customs? Those were on another level. When a Spartan man married, the bride didn't wear a white dress and walk down an aisle. Instead, her head was shaved, completely shaved. She was dressed in a man's cloak and sandals and left alone in a dark room. The groom would then sneak in, and I'm not making this up. He would essentially abduct her briefly before sneaking back to his barracks because Spartan men didn't live with their wives. They lived in military barracks until they were 30. So for the first years of a marriage, a man would have to sneak out at night to visit his wife and then sneak back before dawn like some kind of ancient Greek teenager past curfew. Some scholars believe the head shaving and masculine clothing were transitional rituals to help the groom adjust, since he had spent his entire life up to that point almost exclusively around men. Others think it served different social functions. Either way, it's a far cry from the romantic subplot in the movie. We touched on the Agoge earlier, but we need to go deeper because it's the engine that powered all of Spartan society, and it was intense in ways the movie barely hinted at. At age 7, boys were taken from their families. Not asked. Taken. They were placed into groups and essentially raised by the state. They slept on beds made of reeds that they had to harvest themselves from the riverbank by hand, no tools allowed. They fought each other constantly, not just in training, but as a social structure. Older boys were given authority over younger ones and were expected to discipline them harshly. There was a yearly ritual at the altar of Artemis Orthia, where boys were flogged, sometimes to the point of death, while spectators watched. This wasn't a punishment. It was a test of endurance, and it became such a spectacle that in later centuries, the Romans actually built an amphitheater around the altar so tourists could get better seats. Let that sink in. Roman tourists watching Spartan teenagers get whipped as entertainment. The Agoge also included something called the Cryptaia, a kind of secret police force made up of the best young Spartan men. Their job? To go out into the countryside at night and kill helots, the enslaved population that did all the farming and labor in Sparta. This wasn't rogue behavior, it was institutionally sanctioned. Every year, the Spartan government formally declared war on the helots so that killing them wouldn't technically be murder. The entire system was designed to produce soldiers who were fearless, obedient, and comfortable with violence from childhood. And it worked. For centuries, Sparta fielded the most feared infantry in the Greek world. But the cost was a society so rigid and so dependent on brutality that it eventually consumed itself. So what did 300 actually get right? Honestly, the broad strokes. There really were about 300 Spartans at Thermopylae, though the movie conveniently ignores the several thousand other Greek allies who fought alongside them. Leonidas was a real king. The battle really was a last stand against an enormous Persian force. And the Spartans really were that brave. But the tone, the aesthetics, the personalities, that's pure Hollywood mythology built on top of ancient propaganda. The real Spartans didn't fight in leather briefs. They wore bronze armor, heavy and practical. They didn't deliver witty one-liners mid-combat. They fought in a phalanx, shoulder to shoulder, in a grinding, terrifying press of shields and spears, where individual heroics would get you killed. They weren't freedom fighters. They were an authoritarian military state built on the backs of an enslaved population that outnumbered them sometimes 10 to 1. And that's the part that really matters. Because the myth of Sparta has been used for centuries to justify all kinds of ideologies, toughness culture, militarism, even modern extremist movements. And when we only know the Hollywood version, we lose the ability to see the full picture, a society that was extraordinary and also deeply, deeply flawed. History is always more complicated than the movie. And in Sparta's case, it's also way, way weirder. So the next time someone quotes 300 at you or says they wish society was more like Sparta, you can hit them with the fox story, the hair braiding, the wedding head shaving, and the institutionalized child theft training, and watch their face slowly change. Real history doesn't need slow motion and a dramatic soundtrack to be fascinating. It just needs someone willing to dig past the surface. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the real Sparta, smash that like button. It genuinely helps the channel more than you know. Subscribe if you want more videos like this where we pull back the curtain on the history that Hollywood glosses over. And drop a comment below telling me which Spartan fact surprised you the most, or if there's another historical topic you think deserves the same treatment. I read every single comment, and your suggestions have shaped some of my favorite videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.